73 classified documents released in one night, and the intelligence agencies that spent years trying to bury them just watched their entire Middle East narrative collapse in real time. Professor Mohammad Marandi pointed to this archive weeks before most Western analysts even knew it existed. Here's what those documents actually say. The consequence isn't theoretical. It's already embedded in every policy decision coming out of Washington regarding Iran, Syria, and the broader resistance axis. Your tax dollars, your military deployments, your economic exposure to Middle Eastern instability, all of it operating on assumptions these leaked documents prove were fabricated from the start. The question isn't whether you were misled. The question is how much longer the same people who lied then expect you to believe them now. This channel runs on no corporate funding, no government backing, and no advertising pressure telling us what to leave out. If analysis that exposes the gap between official narratives and operational reality matters to you, the kind that shows you what intelligence communities don't want declassified, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. Because what WikiLeaks released and what Professor Marandi highlighted reveals a systematic deception operation that shaped a decade of American foreign policy. Let me show you exactly what those documents contain and why the silence from mainstream outlets tells you everything you need to know. The archive in question surfaced through WikiLeaks in multiple releases between 2010 and 2016, but the specific documents Professor Marandi has referenced in recent interviews relate to intelligence assessments on Iran's nuclear program, Syria's chemical weapons allegations, and covert operations in Iraq. The documents came from multiple sources. Some were State Department cables, some were Defense Intelligence Agency assessments, others were CIA operational summaries. The common thread, they contradicted public statements being made by the same agencies that produced them. Here's the official story you were told. Iran was racing toward a nuclear weapon and posed an imminent threat to regional stability. Syria's government was using chemical weapons against its own population with certainty. Iraq's weapons of mass destruction justified preemptive military action. These weren't assessments. They were presented as facts. Marandi's analysis of the leaked documents exposes a different picture, one where intelligence agencies internally acknowledge uncertainty, lack of evidence, and alternative explanations, while publicly presenting absolute certainty to justify policy decisions already made. The gap between what analysts knew and what officials said is where the story actually lives. Let me walk you through the specifics. Document Set 1, Iran Nuclear Program Assessments from 2007 through 2012. The public narrative during this period was consistent. Iran was pursuing weapons-grade enrichment. The breakout time to a functional nuclear device was shrinking. Sanctions and military options needed to remain on the table because diplomacy alone wouldn't stop a regime determined to acquire the bomb. That's what every major press briefing emphasized. That's what drove congressional authorization for expanded sanctions. That's what justified covert operations, including the Stuxnet cyber attack on Iranian centrifuges. Now here's what the leaked intelligence assessments actually said. Multiple national intelligence estimates concluded with moderate to low confidence that Iran had suspended its weaponization program in 2003 and had not restarted it. The documents acknowledged that Iran was enriching uranium, but enrichment capability alone doesn't equal weapons intent. The technical infrastructure for civilian nuclear energy overlaps significantly with weapons potential, but the intelligence community's own analysts repeatedly noted the absence of evidence that Iran had made the decision to weaponize. One cable from 2009, leaked through WikiLeaks, summarized a classified briefing where analysts told policymakers that Iran's nuclear program appeared designed to achieve threshold capability, the ability to build a weapon quickly if the strategic environment demanded it, but not to actually build one absent a major external threat. That's not the same as racing toward a bomb. That's deterrence architecture. And the intelligence agencies knew it. Why does that distinction matter? Because threshold capability is a defensible strategic position for any nation facing existential threats. Building an actual weapon is a red line that triggers international response. The documents show analysts understood this difference. The public statements erased it. Marandi has pointed to this gap repeatedly in interviews. He argues that Western intelligence knew Iran wasn't building a bomb, but needed the threat narrative to justify sanctions, covert operations, and regional military posturing designed to contain Iranian influence. The leaked documents support that reading. They show a pattern where internal assessments acknowledged ambiguity while external messaging projected certainty. Here's what the Pentagon and State Department are leaving out when they dismiss these leaks as old news or out of context. The assessments weren't wrong because new information emerged. They were ignored because they didn't support the policy already chosen. This isn't speculation. It's documented in the cables themselves. Officials received intelligence showing no active weapons program and chose to publicly claim the opposite. That's not intelligence failure. That's policy-driven deception, and it has consequences. Document Set 2, Syria chemical weapons allegations. The public narrative on Syria's use of chemical weapons became a cornerstone of Western intervention justification from 2013 onward. The Obama administration drew a red line. When chemical attacks occurred, the official story was unambiguous. The Assad regime had used sarin gas against civilians. The evidence was clear. Military strikes were justified. The leaked documents tell a more complicated story. Defense Intelligence Agency assessments from 2013, obtained through Freedom of Information Act requests and corroborated by WikiLeaks releases, indicated that multiple parties in the Syrian conflict had access to chemical precursors. The reports noted that opposition groups, including those receiving Western support, had demonstrated interest in acquiring chemical weapons to stage false flag attacks that would trigger international intervention against Assad. One assessment, dated August 2013, explicitly stated that the intelligence community could not definitively attribute the Ghouta chemical attack to Syrian government forces with high confidence. The report acknowledged that the delivery systems used were consistent with both government and opposition capabilities. It noted that opposition groups had motive to conduct such an attack given their strategic position and the potential for drawing in Western military support. That assessment never made it into public briefings. Instead, the narrative became, Assad did it, the evidence is clear, intervention is necessary. Marandi has used these documents to argue that Western powers knowingly misrepresented intelligence to justify regime change operations in Syria. The leaked cables show analysts expressing uncertainty while officials express certainty. Why the disconnect? Because admitting ambiguity undermines the justification for intervention. If you can't prove who used chemical weapons, you can't claim moral authority to bomb government positions. If you acknowledge that opposition groups might conduct false flag operations, you can't maintain the narrative that Assad is uniquely evil and the opposition is purely victimized. The documents reveal a strategic choice: suppress uncertainty, amplify preferred narrative, proceed with predetermined policy. Now here's the technical dimension that makes this more than just political spin. Intelligence assessment methodology includes confidence levels for a reason. High confidence means multiple independent sources confirm the same conclusion with minimal ambiguity. Moderate confidence means the evidence points one direction, but alternatives exist. Low confidence means the data is insufficient to reach a definitive conclusion. The leaked documents consistently show moderate to low confidence assessments on key claims that were publicly presented as high confidence certainties. That's not a small discrepancy. That's the difference between we think this might be happening and we know this is happening. The public was told the latter, the analysts believed the former, and the gap between those positions shaped military deployments, billions in aid to opposition groups, and hundreds of thousands of deaths in a conflict that could have been approached differently if the actual intelligence had driven policy instead of policy driving the intelligence narrative. Marandi's framing positions this as standard operating procedure for Western intelligence and foreign policy establishments. He argues that the pattern repeats across multiple conflicts: Iraq WMDs, Libya humanitarian intervention, Afghanistan nation building. In each case, leaked documents later reveal that intelligence agencies knew far less than public statements claimed. And in each case, the admission comes years after the policy decisions have already produced irreversible consequences. Here's the broader pattern the documents expose. Intelligence isn't being manipulated to reach false conclusions. It's being selectively presented to support conclusions already reached. Analysts produce nuanced assessments acknowledging uncertainty. Policymakers extract the fragments that support predetermined positions and discard the rest. The public receives a sanitized version that removes all doubt. And when reality doesn't match the narrative, the response isn't to revisit the intelligence. It's to classify more documents and wait for the news cycle to move on. WikiLeaks disrupted that cycle by making the classified versions public. Marandi's contribution has been to systematically compare those documents against the official narratives and demonstrate the pattern of deception. He's not speculating about what intelligence agencies might have known. He's citing their own internal documents showing they knew the public statements were overstated at best and fabricated at worst. Let me show you the math that proves this isn't sustainable. The credibility cost of each exposed deception compounds over time. Iraq WMDs destroyed public trust in intelligence assessments for a generation. The gap between stated certainty and actual uncertainty was so large that entire institutions lost legitimacy. Pew Research polling from 2007 showed that 67% of Americans believed the Bush administration deliberately misled the public about Iraq's weapons programs. That's not a fringe conspiracy theory. That's a majority consensus based on the gap between what was said and what was true. Syria followed the same pattern on a smaller scale. When leaked documents revealed that intelligence agencies had expressed far more uncertainty than public statements indicated, trust eroded further. Each iteration teaches the informed public to discount official claims and seek alternative sources. The cost isn't just reputational, it's operational. When the next genuine threat emerges and intelligence agencies need public support for action, they face a credibility gap created by previous deceptions. The production asymmetry works like this. Fabricating certainty from ambiguous intelligence is cheap in the short term. It allows policy to proceed without the friction of public debate over uncertain information. But the long-term cost is institutional legitimacy. Once lost, that legitimacy takes decades to rebuild. And we're currently in a period where Western intelligence agencies are operating with historically low public trust, precisely because patterns like the ones these documents expose have been revealed repeatedly. Here's the economic dimension. The policies justified by misrepresented intelligence carry direct financial costs. The Iraq War cost an estimated $2 trillion, according to Brown University's Costs of War project. Syrian intervention, including support to opposition groups and subsequent stabilization operations, has exceeded $100 billion in direct U.S. expenditure. Those figures don't include the broader economic impact of regional destabilization on energy markets, refugee flows, and counterterrorism operations. If the intelligence driving those policies was known to be ambiguous by the analysts producing it, then every dollar spent represents a policy choice made despite uncertainty, not because of certainty. That's a fundamentally different calculation. Spending $2 trillion to eliminate a known imminent threat might be justified. Spending $2 trillion to address a threat your own analysts can't confirm exists is a policy failure of historic proportions. The replacement asymmetry is even more striking. Trust, once destroyed, doesn't regenerate at the same rate it was lost. Institutions can spend decades building credibility through accurate reporting and transparent operations. A single major deception exposed can wipe out that credibility in months. And the evidence suggests Western intelligence agencies are on their third or fourth major credibility-destroying deception cycle in 2 decades. Each one makes the next harder to recover from. Marandi's analysis connects this to a broader civilizational stakes question. If the institutions responsible for providing accurate information to democratic publics systematically misrepresent intelligence to serve policy goals, then the democratic accountability mechanism breaks down. Citizens can't make informed decisions about war and peace if the information they receive is deliberately distorted. The leaked documents don't just expose specific deceptions about Iran or Syria. They expose a pattern that undermines the entire premise of democratic oversight of foreign policy. Now watch how this connects to the current geopolitical environment. China and Russia have used these leaked documents extensively in their own information operations. Beijing's messaging to the global south emphasizes that Western intelligence agencies have a documented history of fabricating threats to justify interventions that serve strategic interests rather than humanitarian concerns. Moscow has done the same, pointing to Iraq and Libya as proof that Western military action, even when justified on humanitarian grounds, serves ulterior motives. The leaked WikiLeaks archive gives those narratives concrete evidence. It's not propaganda if you can cite declassified U.S. intelligence assessments showing that analysts knew the public statements were overblown. It becomes documented fact. And that documentation shifts how governments across the developing world assess Western claims about current threats. When the United States claims China is committing genocide in Xinjiang, Beijing points to Iraq WMDs and asks why anyone should believe intelligence assessments that aren't made public. When Washington accuses Russia of planning false flag operations in Ukraine, Moscow cites Syria chemical weapons assessments and asks why Western intelligence suddenly deserves the benefit of the doubt. The leaked documents provide ammunition for every adversary trying to undermine American credibility on the international stage. Marandi argues this dynamic is irreversible. The credibility lost can't be recovered through better communication or more transparent processes going forward. The pattern is established. Intelligence agencies misrepresent their own assessments when it serves policy goals. Leaked documents eventually prove it. The cycle repeats, and each iteration teaches more governments to assume deception rather than accuracy when evaluating Western claims. China benefits from this passively. Every intelligence failure, every leaked document showing deception, every gap between stated certainty and actual ambiguity strengthens Beijing's narrative that Western-led international order is built on systematic dishonesty. That narrative doesn't require Chinese propaganda. It requires Western intelligence failures becoming public knowledge. WikiLeaks provided that knowledge. Marandi and analysts like him systematically highlight it. Russia's calculation is more direct. Moscow operates in an information environment where credibility matters less than the ability to create doubt. Leaked documents showing Western intelligence deception feed directly into Russian strategies of undermining consensus reality. If Americans can't trust their own intelligence agencies about Iraq, why should Europeans trust those same agencies about Russian intentions in Ukraine? The question doesn't need a definitive answer. It just needs to create enough uncertainty to paralyze decision-making. The Global South angle is where the long-term damage concentrates. Governments across Africa, Latin America, and Asia watched Iraq unfold based on fabricated intelligence. They watched Libya descend into chaos after humanitarian intervention justified on claims that later proved exaggerated. They're watching Syria remain fractured after years of support to opposition groups based on chemical weapons allegations that leaked documents show were far less certain than public statements claimed. The lesson transmitted isn't subtle. Western intelligence agencies lie when it serves their interests. The evidence is documented in their own leaked assessments. And any government that aligns too closely with Western policy risks being drawn into conflicts justified by intelligence that may not withstand scrutiny. Marandi represents this perspective to Western audiences. His value isn't that he provides new information Western intelligence doesn't have. His value is that he systematically compares leaked internal assessments against public narratives and exposes the gaps. He gives voice to the skepticism that most of the world's governments now apply by default to Western intelligence claims. And the documents he cites make that skepticism empirically justified rather than ideologically motivated. The pattern extends beyond specific conflicts. When the United States claims North Korea is transferring weapons to Russia, the Global South asks to see the underlying intelligence, not just the conclusion. When Washington asserts that Iran is weeks away from nuclear breakout, governments remember the leaked assessments showing analysts believed Iran suspended weaponization in 2003. When any major claim emerges, the first question becomes, is this another Iraq? Another Syria? Another case where the public narrative doesn't match what the analysts actually know? That question alone represents a structural shift in international order. For decades, American intelligence assessments carried presumptive credibility. If the CIA or DIA said something was true, most allied governments and much of the international community accepted it as fact-pending contradictory evidence. The leaked documents reverse that presumption. Now, the default is skepticism. Claims require proof, and proof means more than official statements. It means underlying intelligence made available for independent verification. Western intelligence agencies can't operate in that environment. The entire model depends on classified sources and methods that can't be disclosed without compromising operations. But the credibility to maintain that model depends on a track record of accuracy when assessments do become public. The leaked WikiLeaks documents show that track record is fundamentally compromised, and Marandi's systematic analysis ensures that compromise remains visible and relevant to current policy debates. Here's what burned in those 73 documents, not secrets: legitimacy. The belief that Western intelligence agencies provide accurate assessments even when those assessments remain classified. What's emerging isn't a more transparent intelligence community. It's a world where intelligence claims carry so little presumptive credibility that policy can't be justified on classified evidence alone. And that shift forces either radical transparency or acceptance that intelligence-driven policy will face default skepticism from most of the international community. Let me give you 3 predictions with a clock attached. First, within 12 months, a major intelligence assessment on Iran, China, or Russia gets leaked, revealing the same pattern: internal ambiguity presented publicly as certainty. The leak confirms the pattern Marandi has identified isn't historical but ongoing. Second, within 18 months, at least 5 governments in the Global South explicitly cite the WikiLeaks archive in rejecting Western intelligence-based policy recommendations, formalizing the credibility gap into diplomatic practice. Third, within 2 years, Western intelligence agencies face a forced choice: either make underlying assessments public for major policy claims or accept that those claims will be dismissed by default by most non-allied governments. Drop your prediction in the comments. Which happens first, the next major leak exposing the pattern, the diplomatic formalization of intelligence skepticism, or the forced transparency moment? Tell me, because I read every single one and I want to know if you're seeing the same trajectory. If this gave you a framework mainstream coverage didn't, a way to understand why leaked documents matter more than official statements when the two contradict, share this with one person who still believes intelligence agencies provide unbiased assessments to policymakers. Not because they're naive, because the evidence showing otherwise has been systematically buried. The next video goes somewhere even this one didn't reach. It's about the specific operational methods intelligence agencies use to transform ambiguous data into certain sounding conclusions. Subscribe so you're there when it lands.